Hi, everyone. I'm really excited for our show tonight. Welcome to detention. You guys all know what you did to end up here. So we are joined here tonight by Jenny Greeve, who is a longtime CBCG athlete and fan favorite over here at the endurance school. And we are going to talk a little bit about some TrainingPeaks metrics. Bag's going to tell you why
We are
we
going to
invented.
talk this evening. I think Molly just froze for a second. I
Oh
hope we
no.
are still broadcasting. But we are going to talk with Jenny tonight about some user experience stuff. But Jenny Greave is a user experience designer at Macmillan Publishing. She is one of the longest participating CBCG athletes, starting working with us in 2013. She lives in Bend by way of Hood River and Portland and Olympia, Washington. She was part of my original crew of athletes that I called the Olympians, who lived up in Olympia, Washington.
Awesome.
She's competed in Challenge Penticton, Ironman Cozumel, and many cyclocross races. Her favorite race is Blind Date at the Dairy, which is a cyclocross race series here in Portland, Oregon. She has attended 10 CBCG triathlon training camps, a figure that no one else has gotten close to. And I am very lucky to have gotten a chance to work with her over the years. Jenny Greave, thank you so much for coming and joining us in detention.
Thank you for inviting me. Best detention ever.
It really is. It really is. I hope the video stuff is all going well now. Apparently, I cannot have Twitch open in the background and be running the broadcasting software on my computer. It's just too much to ask. So yeah, hopefully everything is going all right now and will continue thus. Let us know if anything drops out though. But Jenny, how are you doing? How is everything going? How's your quarantine life? How's Bend? Tell us a little bit about what you're up to these days.
Yeah, overall, things are going really well. I already work remote. So, in terms of adjusting to working away from the office, it wasn't that big of a transition. Um, I was certainly bummed about the big events of this year being canceled. I was planning on my triumphant return to triathlon because I was dragged back into it by the allure of Ironman Canada, which we were all going to do.
One day.
So next year,
Mm-hmm.
2021. But I got over it pretty quickly because it means that I can really dig into my main focus for the year, which is getting back after ACL surgery. So getting back into training and consistency, and also just spend more time on my gravel bike and my mountain bike and exploring all the wonderful trails Bend has to offer.
Awesome. That is a good
Yeah,
silver lining.
I sort of feel like Ironman Canada is like your white whale. Like
Isn't it?
it just keeps getting away from you.
I know, I kind of worry about it. Like, canceled right the year before we were going to do it,
Yeah.
uh, throwing everything into disarray, and now this. But next year,
Yep,
August 29th, we'll be
next
there.
year. So Jenny, one of the reasons that we've got you on is so we are pretty firmly committed to Training Peaks by this point. I think there's 70 or 80 CBCG athletes, so we are, at least to use a gambling term, pot stuck with Training Peaks. um, but I think it's something that is not the easiest tool to use right out of the box.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the reasons we had you on was to hear about your experience using it and kind of some of the ways that you have altered using it over the years. And I know that you're a best practices person. I actually learned that term from you. And so getting from an athlete's perspective some of the best practices that I think coaches miss because we spend our entire day inside of Training Peaks.
Mm-hmm.
So that's I just wrapped up like six questions into one. So to get going, what is from a user experience perspective? Like, what do you kind of have to say about TrainingPeaks?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I mean, onboarding into TrainingPeaks is incredibly easy. If at the outset, you go to the website, you create an account. We have it dialed in terms of like CBCG coaches and athletes getting hooked up so that coaches can start delivering workouts. And they have just a few like starter basic places that you can go, and it's very obvious what some of those first pages are doing. There's a home that's kind of like your dashboard of here's what you've got coming up, here's what you may have just done, and calendar. And these are not unfamiliar concepts to so many other experiences that we have on the internet. What is interesting is that you can get through that onboarding process, and all of a sudden you're there, you're looking at your week, you have your workouts, you can click for more details. So they provide a very layered experience into like, how much information do I need at a time, which is great. What I have discovered though, over the now, I don't know, like 7 years of using TrainingPeaks and all of our time working together, is that it has so much power. It's kind of like an iceberg. You can see and quickly access what is above the water, but there is so much else there. And even as recently as like 3 weeks ago, Chris, when you and I were talking, like I was sharing with you that I had discovered like functionality I didn't even know existed. And you were sharing like a whole new type of metric that I can track. And, this is again, like after 7 or so years of using this program. So I do think it's really great that for getting started, it can be like a real quick experience. And I think that it also just takes time to learn about additional features and to even maybe like feel out and try stuff out and figure out like, is this usable for me? Is this something that I want to continue to dig into? And that can also be a really great opportunity for us to talk athlete coach of like, how do we want to use this tool moving forward?
Awesome. One thing, I kind of want to rewind here a little bit and ask you, like, what are the things what do you look for as a user experience, like a user experience designer? Like when you are, what's some of the vocabulary that you use in evaluating sites or looking at how something works? Like, I think that's one of those things that is always interesting to hear about, is like a particular profession's kind of lingo.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, there is one could say like a standard to how we might approach a website or a web application and analyze it for best practices. And what we use when we're doing that are often called heuristics, which is a little bit of a fancy term for best practices. A famous guy in the world of user experience is Jacob Nielsen, and he came up with 10 user experience heuristics. That is an industry standard as a way that we can look at a website and start to think about, how is this website performing for its users? Is it providing a usable experience, and where might it be falling short? And some of what falls in the world of, user experience heuristics that we are looking for is like, how are they handling errors? So when stuff goes wrong, are they just leaving users hanging, or do they have really good error handling for helping people to recover from whatever it is that they've, messed up? Another angle of a user experience heuristic can be, learnability and patterns. So like, are they kind of creating some consistent patterns that we can look to, so we can start to like quickly and kind of in the background know like, what am I supposed to do here? Or are they kind of all over the place, not creating any patterns? What we might also other perspectives that we can use when we're looking at websites and web applications, might be like, how learnable is it? So is it something that we can quickly like get up and get going? And this is something interesting about TrainingPeaks that I've shared with y'all in the past, which is navigating around TrainingPeaks can be like pretty straightforward. You're clicking, you're going into new areas, you're exploring, but of course they have all of these very powerful metrics that you can view. But they aren't really providing like very much information and background on what these metrics are. Like a great example that I keep bringing up is like TSS. Mm-hmm. You can look at a wonderful visual that shows you your TSS, but like, what is TSS? So, learnability and what they're talking about. And so not only learnability on how to like get around the site and use it, but also learnability of like, what is this information that they're presenting to us?
Yeah, very interesting. So I feel like that kind of starts to answer this question, but is there anything else that from your experience or your background and user experience really stands out, either as like a positive or a negative that that users would encounter when they were engaging with TrainingPeaks?
Yeah, one thing that is interesting is that, I do kind of feel like they have prioritized that very quick onboarding experience. Mm-hmm. Like, let's just get them signed up and get them their like home, their calendar, their dashboard. And they very much, in my mind, deprioritized the power of settings and being able to personalize the experience to what's going to work for you. And here's an example. I did just get back on TrainingPeaks this year since I'm like back getting coached again after my hiatus. And I was unbelievably annoyed for the first 4 months of using TrainingPeaks again, that every time I logged in, it was defaulting me to the home tab. I understand like working in UX environments, like, let's create a dashboard. Let's create their like central space where they can see everything. But for me, that's not what I wanted. Like, I really wanted to efficiently get to my calendar so I could see, what do I have going on this week? I want to dig into my workouts. And it took me 4 months to discover that there's actually a whole world of settings. And there's a place where you can say like, hey, I want TrainingPeaks to always default to my calendar.
Mm-hmm. Huh. I didn't actually know that.
Yeah. And so that opened like a whole new door for me of just, whoa, not only did I see that I can do this in my settings, but there's all sorts of personalization that I can do, down to what do I want each of my workouts to show me like when they pop up. Another like interesting, and hopefully I don't take us down like a segue here, thing about personalization is something that Chris and I talked about at length for many years, which is another interesting thing when it comes to user experience. And it's the fact that TrainingPeaks color codes your workouts depending on if you have completed them and to what level you have completed them. And what Chris and I talked about so often for many years is that from a coach's perspective, or like a sort of teacher's perspective, Chris did not think that this was a beneficial thing because, and I'm putting words in your mouth, but like you thought that was, athletes are born for those colors. They needed the streak of green.
They want to turn everything green, right?
From an athlete's perspective, yes, it was, I can say that it was like a very good shorthand for me to gauge, to very quickly look over my week and see, how do they do here? And bringing us back to the settings, I have discovered that is something that you can manipulate in the settings as the athlete.
And as the coach.
Oh, you can do that.
We can turn them off for all of you.
We can meddle in the metrics.
Yeah, that's like the nuclear button that Chris never presses, but I always want to press.
I've threatened it a couple times, never actually done it.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm going to launch those missiles. I'm going to take away your colorized workouts.
Everything gray, all the time gray.
Yeah, I mean, in my world of current user experience and working with in educational technology with both instructors and students, this is a question I deal with on a daily basis. Like, do we need to design to fulfill like the needs and desires of the instructor and their pedagogy, in this case, coach, or what the students want to do? And, you know, it's a struggle.
Yeah. Let's I think that might be a good jumping off point, because you sort of brought up a few things that then we could talk about those advanced metrics a little more deeply. The TSS, I think we'll pull up your performance manager chart and talk about a few of like TSS and then a few of the other abbreviations. And then one thing I think we might do is one thing you and I did together a little while ago was get into that settings menu, and we sort of customize your metrics dashboard. So let's go ahead and do that, and maybe that will also that'll give us a chance to like kind of keep the conversation with you going about user interface while we continue to talk about what some of these metrics are. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
Okay.
And so Molly's gonna
Should be ready. Go ahead.
Gonna change some stuff, and then Molly is going to tell us the big takeaway message from tonight's show.
Okay.
That is the thing that is going to that is way more important than anything we talk about in terms of metrics. So let me locate TrainingPeaks now so I can actually share it. And well, see, I'm having a user experience moment.
The screen is ready. It's just showing half you and Jenny now. There we go.
Okay, there we go.
Look at that.
All right, so Molly, what is the thing that we should always remember when we're talking about these kinds of metrics of any kind, advanced or not?
So I think that that especially with these specific kinds of metrics, the TrainingPeaks metrics are based on several moving targets. They can never be 100% accurate because we're trying to gauge your coaches, or you, if you're self-coached, are trying to gauge your threshold pace, your threshold heart rate, your FTP, all of these numbers that TrainingPeaks is using as the way that they calculate all of these metrics. Your TSS, your CTL, all of these numbers that TrainingPeaks has come up with are reliant on accurate testing and on consistently updated settings that make sure that, like, as your FTP improves, that you're continuing to update it. But your fitness is a moving target, and the results that come into TrainingPeaks depend really highly on these imperfect test protocols. So if your threshold heart rate is set much too low because the only test you've ever done for heart rate, like, you just couldn't quite push hard enough, or it's much too high because it was hot or you were dehydrated, that is going to change what all of these numbers look like. But the big thing that I think athletes and coaches need to remember is that the accuracy of all of this data can really be improved and triangulated by the qualitative data that you put into it. So we have the quantitative stuff, we have all the numbers, but the qualitative information, which includes your perception of your workouts, which includes your level of fatigue, how you're feeling, whether you enjoyed them, that really helps to make this data a whole lot more useful, and it can help with monitoring and documenting trends, which is really the best thing that I think the TrainingPeaks information can be used for.
Yeah, Jenny, the last time, and you brought this up when we were in our like pre-talk, that when we were working together for Ironman Cozumel back in 2017, you would kind of close out each of your workout reports with like a scale of 1 to 10. Just like a very subjective, big picture view along with all the information. And I can't tell you how much more important that was to me than like the particular data that you were giving me, because it allowed both of us to like contextualize what your experience was, so it was like, like maybe the heart rate data was off, but you were like, this was 9 out of 10. I felt great, and it really, and that allowed us to really talk about that effectively. So Jenny, so you've got this performance manager chart in front of you. What does this mean to you from an athlete and a user experience? Like you look at this, like there's some blue, there's some yellow, there's some purple. Like what do you look at this and what do you take away from this?
Yeah, I mean, as an athlete and somebody that is not super great with metrics, like this is Greek to me. uh, I think as like what my eye does see as the dominant pattern here is like the blue line and the blue shading. So I'll be interested as we start to talk more about like what is this chart trying to communicate to us, to hear if that is what it's really trying to communicate to us, because that is really what I am seeing as the dominant factor here. Mm-hmm. And then from a user experience perspective, what I feel as though TrainingPeaks they made a choice to sort of leave out some of the guidance and the teachable moments that they potentially could have included here. So as you're hovering over this dot, you know, it gives us like TSS, fatigue, fitness, form, TSB, ATL, CTL, but like, what do these mean? And there's no way to sort of access like definitions or more information about what this is. And they are probably fine with that decision. I'm guessing they are fine with that decision because, you know, it's now been 7 years of using this and they've never built in that sort of additional information. But it's just interesting and like, what does that mean for somebody that is not really steeped in data and maybe is like in the first couple of years of their experience of like being coached and using this program? It means that they need to go and spend time like trying to figure this out, or they're having conversations with their coaches of like, what does this mean? And that must mean for like you and Molly, you're spending a lot of time maybe having the same conversations over and over, trying to explain what this means to your athletes.
Molly, so like, imagine that you're working with Jenny and you're looking at this chart together. Like, could you take us through like some of these metrics? I'm sort of stuck on the screen, so I can't get back over to our cheat sheet for all of our stuff. Like, could you take us through what those 4 metrics that Jenny just brought up, TSS, ATL, CTL, TSB, and like how we use them like in the way that you just described? Like these are metrics that we use along with the qualitative.
Yeah, absolutely. So another careful here warning is that all of these are really dependent on correct threshold values for pace, heart rate, and power. So we know that Chris works with Jenny, so we can assume with some pretty high accuracy that there's good data behind it. But this shouldn't necessarily be extrapolated out to your own chart, depending on who's behind it. If it's you who is behind it, there's a lot of like back end management that really is necessary to make these numbers mean anything. And even once they do mean something, you have to take them somewhat with a grain of salt. So mostly the 3 numbers that we hear the most about from people are, 4, I guess. First we have ATL, which is your acute training load. And that is the number that you can see up here in pink. They call this fatigue. So this is a weighted average of your daily training stress score, which is TSS, that number there. Which is how TrainingPeaks tries to quantify how much impact a specific workout is going to have on your fitness, how hard something was, and how it's a factor of how hard it was and how long it was. That's a number that they assigned. So Jenny, on this dot that bag is hovering over right now, that is probably a very long or very hard workout. So what do we have there?
We have a Just Go Ride. Jenny, I'm sorry, I'm sort of throwing you under the bus here, but this is great. This is a nice example of how this sometimes happens. So this was originally scripted as an hour and a half to 2 hour, just go rad as you feel, choice of bike. And I'm pretty sure what happened here was a super fun 3 hour mountain bike ride.
Mm-hmm. I can see that.
And we see this like super happy smiley face, which is great. And I think this is one of those moments where where definitely the athlete experience trumps the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Because like a little longer than planned, but also like you and I have talked, and I've been like, hey, like when you want to go ride your bike, ride your bike. Like the whole goal this summer is to build a lot of aerobic conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
So like kind of the sky's the limit. But yeah, I mean, this is much longer than, than a lot of the rides that you've been doing. And I bet, if we go over here and look at heart rate, like, yeah, I mean, 2 hours and 40 minutes in your aerobic development zone. So that's money in the bank. But that's why it's generating this really high 215 heart rate TSS number. So yeah, I mean, the reason I hovered over this one is because usually you can get a story from the dots that are at the top.
Yeah, the outliers, right?
Yeah.
That's awesome. That looks like a really fun ride. So we have ATL, which is your fatigue. And that is another thing to remember with that is that these are functions of a lot of separate numbers. So CTL, which is what TrainingPeaks tries to quantify as your fitness, which is this sort of like blue mass that you see. The CTL in this graph is the shaded blue. So this is how fit they believe that an athlete is given the numbers that they have. So you can see that after probably an off season, there was a fairly long build, and then probably a bit more of like a changing course or changing direction. We often see lines start to come down a bit if athletes are injured, or if there's some kind of, or if like most of us actually have some like depression in our lines right at that point because swimming pools are gone. So like the workout that we were getting in the form of our swim workouts went away. So a lot of people are seeing their CTL leveling off, which isn't necessarily a sign that you are detraining. This is again just kind of TrainingPeaks representation of your CTL. And CTL, the TSS for swim with TrainingPeaks is notoriously incorrect. So bear that in mind. They tend to prescribe significantly too much TSS because athletes swim with their Garmin's on and hit the lap button. And so it shows as if you were swimming, like if you do a CSS paced workout or a threshold paced workout where you're swimming most of that at threshold, it gets rid of all of the rests and assumes that you were swimming that hard for the entire period that you were swimming, even though, so it doesn't take into account the amount of time that you were resting, and assigns a much too high TSS score to it in most cases. So most people have artificially inflated CTLs during the time that pools are open if they're using their Garmin's. But a lot of people right now are seeing kind of a leveling off as pools are closed.
I think this might have also been, this might have been a period where your knee was bugging you.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, injury would do that.
I think this particular kind of slide from sort of end of April to middle of May, I think is where the knee was kind of rearing its head a little bit.
Jenny, what were you going to say?
Yes. Oh, so processing your explanation of CTL, let's imagine we're an athlete that is on, like a year-long build toward an Ironman. Mm-hmm. Is our hope that the CTL line is going to do like a slow climb, or is it more subject to like the builds that we do of like a 3-week build, 1 week off, and it almost looks more like a wave?
That's a great question. So I think
that is the question.
Yeah. That's a great question. So we don't want to see an athlete just sort of like skyrocket towards fitness. So what we're seeing here, that slope there actually looks really nice. So we want to see a gradual increase, but you can see that this number goes up and then comes down. Like those peaks and valleys there are appropriate periods of rest during training. But what we see is that there's a general trend in an upward direction. You'll also see though, so like let's say that an athlete's targeting an Ironman that's in the fall, but they also have a half Ironman race in the spring. This CTL is incredibly responsive to very hard training sessions. So let's say you raced at one point, you're certainly going to see a peak in your CTL following that race that will almost certainly decline because of the recovery that you need after your race is over, which is extremely appropriate. We wouldn't want to see people not recovering and not seeing that decline in the slope there. So it's not necessarily going to be a steady and gradual rise up at all times. You're going to see a little bit of rippling in any season. I think that's going to be interesting and exciting for athletes. But yeah, I think that you do want to see a gradual rise overall, but not necessarily a nothing but gain, if that makes sense.
And this particular, the performance manager charts of all of our athletes in 2020 tell, like Molly was pointing out before, like, oh, there's probably a big drop when pools all closed. Mm-hmm. We're also like, this basically tells the story of this year. Athlete, super motivated, super diligent, like training for an Ironman in early September. And then right around end of May, this slide right here was an intentional mid-season break. Like we were like, okay, you are super duper fit. Mm-hmm. Let's take our foot off the gas pedal for 5 or 6 days. And really, I was just like, do whatever you want. And so this slide was intentional. However, upon returning from that, a lot of athletes are struggling with motivation. And Molly and I were talking about this earlier today with my own training. Now you see this particular pattern of kind of like up and down and up and down and up and down. And then all of a sudden, a month has gone by. And according to this chart, nothing has changed, this is one of the reasons why this chart doesn't tell the whole story. I know that this athlete has done some really, really good work during that month where this chart thinks nothing has changed, but it can tell us some stories about where the athlete is at. We can see a really nice, consistent, motivated build throughout, up until the end of May. And then, a lot of athletes, we see this come this time of year, and this year everything is amplified. But usually right around June, July, athletes do go through that kind of mid-season swoon in terms of motivation, where things are not as when they're not as excited about it.
And as we were talking about earlier, as you get fitter, it takes more to move this line up. So it's not. Yeah, constant training stimulus doesn't necessarily result in improvements in fitness above a certain point. So it's definitely something that we need to keep thinking about as coaches to make sure that we're challenging athletes in the way that they need to be challenged in order to keep moving that line up. And the fitter you are, the harder that gets.
I think.
Go ahead, Jenny.
Oh, well, I really like what you said there a moment ago, Bag, in terms of looking at that chart and how it kind of almost just tells part of the story, and how that the athlete is doing quality work. In the world of user experience, we can draw on metrics and analytics to help inform our work and our research. But it's only part of the story, which is why interviews of users and any qualitative experiences that we can get are so powerful, which is, wonderful that we get to have meetings with our coaches here at CBCG, where we can share with you how things are going. And I think it also speaks to a decision that we all have to make as athletes of how do we what are we bringing to the table beyond just like making sure our data is uploaded from our watches?
Mm-hmm.
And I know that like personally, that is something that I have not been doing very well this year. And I just saw it when you like called me out for that workout I did on Sunday, where I just dropped a bunch of like hours over the prescribed workout with nothing more than a smiley face. Like at least maybe I did the smiley face,
Yeah.
but I wish that I would have put more in there, because, you know, when you and I have our coaches chat in 3 weeks from now, I might not remember, and I might just be like, oh, I don't know, but I'm sure it was great because it was a big smiley face.
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
I would like to personally be better about like being sure to include some notes in my workouts like I used to do, and I'm not doing that right now.
It does make for a really powerful experience, like because I mean you have a TrainingPeaks account that goes back to 2013 now, and it's been amazing to go back and look at some of my workouts from 2008, 2009, like all like and be like, oh wow, like okay, that's what I thought about. And it really it's one of the wonderful things about this is that it can help you kind of remember what you've done.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I shifted over to the settings page. So now that I know that you hate the homepage so much, I'm going to every now and then make your default view your homepage in here.
That's terrible. Before we shift
funny.
away though, do you mind if I say one thing about TSB? Because we didn't quite get there.
Oh, great. Yes.
So TSB is what TrainingPeaks calls form. It's that yellow line. A lot of athletes use it to figure out how fatigue or how race ready they are. So many people say that like you want to see that number somewhere in the like range of 10, right around race day, in the positive, like 0 to 10, 5 to 15, depends by the athlete, what number they're really targeting. That number is super responsive to the workouts that have happened in the days prior. So you could absolutely get to a perfect like TSB number, data wise, by having much too long of a taper and then having a very hard workout the day before your race. And that would give you the number that you were looking for. So the best way to use that one is, again, following a training plan that works for you and then monitoring those trends to know that like you tend to race better at, you know, around a 7 to 10 on that scale or on that using that number. But we want to see that number negative in general to show that athletes are improving. So a negative number typically means that your workouts are having some effect. So good job, Jenny.
Yeah. Yeah, because TrainingPeaks will tell you like there's this range where like athletes are going to perform better, and like that's just based on world averages.
Mm-hmm.
It's not based on you. And so if you keep track over time, like I like things went pretty well when I was in this like 15 number range, you know, and if you keep track of that over time and have like real long-term data, then it becomes usable and powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool.
All right, we're going to take a quick detour into some user interface stuff here, because this is so one of the things that Jenny, that you and I did is we dropped down here to the metrics page, because we were talking about what are kind of the 11 things that I, and this is just me personally, find really useful when athletes leave comments about. And so if you go into your TrainingPeaks account and you drop into layout and then come down here to metrics, there's a whole bunch of stuff in here that can be helpful to your coach. I don't know why steps are in there. Can I take steps out, Jenny? Are you counting steps?
No.
One nice thing about this is you can just drag them back and forth. There is some stuff in here that over time can help your coach kind of like paint a useful picture. I'm going to exit here for a second and come on back to Jenny's dashboard. And this will graph like a couple metrics that pull data from there. In this case, it's tracking weight and stress. You can assign kind of whichever you want, primary and secondary, up here in this hamburger menu. But these are the ones that I really find useful. And what we did, Jenny and I had a phone call. We basically just dragged over the ones that we thought would be helpful. But weight and percent fat, big caveat here, everybody. We are not always aiming for lighter and leaner. That is not that's not a unilateral thing. And having those metrics in there can tell us a lot about the athlete's physical health. And so that's the reason why that those can be helpful.
And hydration.
Yeah, right. Sure, as we're approaching a race, sometimes we might talk about body composition, but that is a conversation that should really be prefaced by like a real strong conversation about like health and everything like that. This industry is, you gotta be careful. Like, it is easy to get obsessed about those two particular things. And as we heard last week from Tim Snow here in detention, that being lighter can actually really, really hurt your performance. So those are two that are in there, but caveat. Sleep is great. Knowing like not every night, but every few nights, what an athlete's kind of sleep picture looks like. Overall feeling is really nice. Get a sense of like, I feel great, I feel terrible. The note is just a place for athletes to leave notes. Menstruation, really, really helpful. Female athletes, let your coaches know about it. Coaches, this is something that you should be able to talk to your female athletes about. So have that conversation, because like a woman's cycle really does like affect what is going on for training and working out and how they're feeling. So it really is really nice to know where the athlete is in her cycle, so you can adjust. Motivation is probably one of the ones that I really like, because if an athlete is routinely letting you know that they are demotivated, something is wrong. Like something is up, and it's time for a conversation. Pretty much all of these metrics are conversation starters. And that's the reason why they are helpful to track. Sure, you can put them on a graph and you can get a visual picture of what's happening for the athlete over time. But like, I know a lot of the athletes that I work with are used to hearing me ask diet, sleep, mood, stress. And you can see those metrics are on here. So you can backstop it with a weekly conversation. But if an athlete is dropping in, like, oh, like my mood is terrible, my sleep is crappy, my stress is high, and my appetite is not normal, like something's up. And those are the ones that can really help paint a fuller picture of an athlete's experience. And I think, like Jenny, when you and I went through this, like this was another one of those sort of buried features that like not many people use or know about.
Yeah, it absolutely was. I mean, I've seen the metrics tab when you go to like add a workout, or like classification, and I didn't really know what it was. And building on what you said, Chris, this is a conversation starter between like an athlete and a coach. I think it can be a conversation starter just for the athlete. And so, I mean, I only have maybe 4 of these so far. It is a like personal goal for me to start using this a couple of times a week. So I think so far I've done it like maybe once a week, but it's just been interesting to ask myself the question, like, how motivated am I? What's my mood level? And there have been some times where it's like, my mood, not great. Motivation, actually not bad. So by asking myself that question, it's like, well, if my motivation isn't that bad, like I shouldn't skip my workout. So it's another way, I think, for us to just like be maybe a little bit more honest with ourselves as athletes with what's going on.
It can also help, I think, that like, so say you're in that place where your mood is not great and your motivation is not great. Like if there's the big 4, diet, sleep, mood, stress, like Molly and I always tell people like, okay, if you're not feeling a workout, go try to do the first quarter. Like if you know going into the first quarter that like two of those metrics are already off, like a lot of times athletes have trouble stopping a workout. They really have trouble pulling the plug because, we're type A people, like there's this culture of completism. But like if a few metrics are already off and you're struggling through a workout, just go home.
I also think this is a great way to help you recognize, to help coaches and self-coached athletes to recognize some of the trends that are really critical to pay attention to. So for those of us who have athletes who are training for Ironman distance races or Ultraman distance races, or who go to training camps, seeing numbers in the pretty deep negatives is not uncommon for some athletes to see their form like pretty well negative. But I have an athlete who, as soon as he gets anywhere near like negative 35 or something, which is, after a really hard weekend for someone like him, starts to feel like garbage. And for somebody else, if they started to get near that number, they could bounce back relatively quickly. So having those notes and like that information and the qualitative information about what that specific athlete feels like when that number says what it says it does, it's never definite, but it's a good way to start recognizing some trends that can help you to designate or to design their plan going forward.
I will say from a UX perspective, some of their like ranges and options that they've provided in the drop downs for those.
Oh my God.
Chris, you warned me that they were a little weird, and they're strange.
Way too many, right?
Yeah, I mean, for motivation, it is extremely unmotivated, very unmotivated, uninspired, below average, above average, inspired, motivated, very motivated, extremely motivated. So I'd love to talk to TrainingPeaks about how they got to this list.
That's great.
I love that motivated is apparently higher than inspired.
Right?
Inspired is pretty much the top of the range for me.
So I feel like I can be inspired and unmotivated at the same time. Like I'm really excited about like working out. I'm inspired by working out, but I'm not going to do it.
They need like a separate inspiration.
Yeah, exactly. I don't feel like those are on the same scale. It's a wrong Likert.
Well, if anybody on this Twitch wants to take the metrics challenge with me, let's commit to like 2 months. We're going to track our metrics at least 2 times a week.
It's a great challenge.
And we'll circle back.
And the winner gets the recipe for olive oil cake.
I will take that challenge too, because I am also readjusting to life with like a coach, because Molly is like overseeing my training now. And so I've gotten a few notes from her recently that's like, hey, leave me some feedback on your workouts. So I will also take the metric challenge.
I also made you talk to me about recovery and rest.
That's true. I'm going to pull up, this is my training we're looking at now, because we're going to pull up some of those, like some of the like power-based and like advanced metrics that we talked about, and kind of go through what some of those are, because we got about 10 minutes left and we want to jump through some of those. And so Jenny, as we kind of talk about these, this could be an interesting place for you to jump in and be like, oh, like, that's not something I've used before, or tell me more about that. Molly, do you want to start with a run workout or a bike workout? Where do you want to go?
Let's do bike workout, because I feel like a lot of this stuff in TrainingPeaks is really based around power.
Okay.
So I think we're going to see the most stuff in a bike workout, and a lot of the stuff that we see in a bike workout will translate to the run.
Okay. Let me find. Let's have a look at today's Sufferfest ride.
Great.
This might be a little. Who knows what we're gonna get in here?
Yeah.
But,
one thing to keep in mind with this one too is I think that Sufferfest, and I'm checking this right now in my app, but I think Sufferfest thought that this was going to be closer to a 90 TSS workout. So for the fact that this says 82 on Chris's TrainingPeaks makes it possible that it is time for him to retest his FTP.
and this is a great reminder of what we talked about at the beginning. I got off of this workout this morning, and when we talked, I was like, that was easier for me than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
And that's one of those signs where an athlete can give you the contextualization to like really get a sense of what's actually happening. We're going to focus like what we're talking about in the like this top right hand box up here where it says entire workout and then it's got a bunch of numbers. So this first one here, work, and it says 1157 kilojoules.
Time for tacos.
It's what?
Time for tacos.
Yeah, right. I was that's probably around 4 tacos actually.
Yep.
So kilojoules do correspond really nicely to kilocalories. And so when you know how much work you did in a workout, it can provide you some guidance about what you need to put back in. We're never totally looking for like 100% refill, because especially if you're in a race, that is going to be impossible. Like if you think that you're probably burning close to 6 to 1200 kilojoules an hour. The idea of putting in 4 tacos an hour while racing is probably not possible. But it does let us know that that we should be putting some back in. This was an hour-long workout, and I went through almost 1,200 kilojoules. This was a hard bike ride. 91% of threshold power, which is this IF number right here, this 9.1. So that's what that is. That gives you an idea of what percentage of threshold you held for the whole time. Like all of these, there are some caveats. That intensity factor is pulled off of your normalized power, not your average power. So you can see that there's a difference. NP is my normalized power, 340, and the actual average power is 323. So if we wanted to know what my like average power for the whole hour, what that as a percentage of FTP, it's probably like 0.88 or 0.87. That's something that TrainingPeaks, that's one of those things that TrainingPeaks doesn't explain very well. And they actually get out there and tell people, okay, if you're doing an Ironman, you should have an intensity factor of 0.75 to 0.8, but they don't point out the fact that it's coming from normalized power, not average power. And usually there's going to be some difference about that. We'll get to that difference in a second. But 1157 kilojoules, I mean, that I look at that number and I'm like, yeah, that was a really solid workout. I know that when I'm doing bike racing, I usually burn about 1,000 kilojoules an hour. So if I were in a period where I was focused on bike racing, this would be a workout that really effectively, really tells me something about, lets me know that I'm preparing effectively for bike racing. Next number down, normalized power. Molly, do you want to jump in normalized power?
Yeah, well, I actually just realized we're not going to see a great encapsulation of VI on a trainer ride. Would you be able to switch to
That's true. That is true for sure. So here's a recovery spin done with a bike with a power meter on it.
Awesome.
Oh, yeah. 1.08.
Oh, that's not bad for a recovery spin.
Not great.
Not great. So do you want to do VI now since we dipped into it, or do you want me to go to normalized power? I'm happy to do either.
Why don't you do both, because they're so closely related.
Okay, so normalized power is an algorithm it's trying to estimate the physiological cost of a workout or of a period of a workout. So you can actually select within this workout just one piece of it. So you could look at one interval, and this removes all of the zeros essentially. So it takes out the time when Chris was not pedaling. It takes out the zeros. This is the amount of work that he did if you look at this ride and only count the time that he was working. Does that make sense, Chris? Does that translate to your understanding of normalized power?
Absolutely.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah. It was developed for criterium riders, so people who go out and do like, ride in a box, and there's like lots of sprinting and lots of coasting, and they would have really low average powers afterwards. Their average powers would be like in the endurance zone, and they'd be like bleeding out of their eyes and throwing up.
Exactly.
That doesn't reflect what happened.
So the variability index is the ratio of normalized power to your actual power. So how close was the time that you were actually riding? How close was that to the entire ride? So this includes all of the zeros. This includes the time that you coasted down the hill. This includes the time that you were drafting off of the racer in front of you. If you're doing a bike race. So this number is going to be really different depending on the type of event that you do. But if you're a time trialist or a triathlete, you want to see that number be somewhere below 1.05. So somewhere in the 1 to 1.05 range is generally what folks tend to look for. Chris made the really good point that that higher numbers can indicate fatigue and can signal that a run off the bike is going to be a lot more challenging. And that's partially because an object in motion wants to stay in motion. So having to stop and restart is going to tire you out more. It's going to take more effort and energy out of you. But it's also a really good indicator of an athlete's skill level. If you're looking at a very hilly course, it can be skill and it can be competence. But if you're looking at a very hilly course and you're seeing a really high variability index, what that probably says is that an athlete may not be comfortable descending, might be coasting on descents, and may really be working hard as they're climbing. So that can really change that number to something really high. I've seen numbers up to 1.35, 1.4 on really hilly courses. So yeah, that's one that you do want to pay attention to, although not as useful on a trainer usually.
And Jenny, for cyclocross, you're like, if you're measuring power for a cyclocross ride, that variability index is often going to be like above like 1.4 because like you spend so much time like cyclocross is sprinting and coasting. Mm-hmm. Like you're either at 200% of FTP or zero, and so your average power actually ends up being pretty low. But you're like, no, that was super hard. And so you can tell kind of what the athlete's experience was based on variability index.
You don't necessarily want to run off a cyclocross race.
Yeah. If you've ever tried to run after a cross race, which I'm sure I've made you do, it's way worse than normal. Like it's a really not fun experience. Let's see. The next one we're going to talk about is power to heart rate, and we're actually displaying a negative value here, which is not really, it kind of doesn't compute or is not really useful. So I'm going to try to find a workout where it makes a little bit more sense. Okay.
Wow.
So, okay. So power to heart rate. And so we're looking at this metric here. It says PW:HR, and 17%. What this is doing is this is comparing the two halves of the workout, and basically power divided by heart rate, and comparing the first half and the second half, and measuring how different those ratios are from the first half of the ride to the second half of the ride. And what we want those numbers to split apart as little as possible. Basically, we would like the athlete to, if their power goes up, their heart rate should go up. If their power goes down, their heart rate should also go down and mirror it. Where we know that an athlete is really starting to struggle is if power and heart rate are splitting apart like this. Or if we're on this axis, heart rate dropping, power, actually, usually what we see happening is power staying the same and or heart rate climbing while power drops.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a classic sign of the athlete either being tired, dehydrated, hot, hungry, unfit, a whole host of things. And this really does reflect how I felt. I went out on this bike ride last Friday. It was the first time I've had my road bike in months. I was like, oh, I'm so excited to ride my road bike. I think I was a little more tired than I thought because my power to heart rate split apart 17% from the first half to the second half. This is what we call decoupling. And it means that it probably means that I was either really tired or dehydrated or hungry.
Or all of the above.
Or all of the above. Or just not that into it. We want this number for any steady effort to be below 5%. If it's below 5%, then that is an acceptable amount of splitting apart. And that's a good sign for that athlete's current fitness.
So is there a way that one could maybe get some hints like you just got from this power to heart rate number without if they don't have a power meter?
You can do it for the run. The run uses pace to heart rate. And I would say, let's see, the best like subjective or qualitative way that you know that something that you can get that sense is those rides where the end of the ride is just kind of miserable.
I think there's another way too. One of the things that we look for with our athletes is the effect that recovery has on a workout. So if you are doing a workout where you have a series of intervals, especially, and you have a recovery period after each one of those, and the first one you see your heart rate really like recover and like, tank down, then awesome. That's a really good sign of fitness. And then as you work out, you would expect that recovery to get a little more shallow, that trough to get a little more shallow. But sometimes when athletes are really fatigued, you see that line just sort of start to level off, and you see heart rate start to really climb in the harder efforts, or in some cases you see heart rate not able to get up at all. But it's another one of those things where like the more you know about yourself and the way that you respond to fatigue, the better you're able to identify it.
Cool.
I'm going to grab you again, Jenny, to talk about the run version of that. So on the bike, it's power to heart rate. On the run, it's pace to heart rate. And I'm going to pull up one of your. So this is a run from June 23rd. Not a big smiley face, but like a medium smiley face. And so again, negative numbers on the run are a little bit more helpful than power numbers, because what it actually means is that your pace and your heart rate are getting closer together at the end of the workout. You do have to be a little careful about this. The terrain can really affect things. Mm-hmm. Like if you live at the bottom of a hill and you sprint down the hill, so you're sort of keeping your heart rate up, but your pace is suddenly skyrocketing. That will artificially like narrow those train tracks and bring them together. So that's something you kind of have to look for. I can see that here you're actually like you're the end of your run ends like slightly uphill, and so the fact that we're at a negative 1.35 means that your heart rate and your pace are staying really nicely locked together. And if you look back over the course of this workout, like that's definitely what you see. Like you see heart rate, this red line, mirroring pretty closely the green line, which again is changeable. It goes up and down all the time. But this is a good sign. Like if we were to kind of look at these regularly and be like, all right, yeah, like Jenny is routinely returning pace to heart rate numbers that are, below 5%. That's a good thing. I think that you had another one later in the week where you frowny faced. I was so tired over the weekend. And, like, this is one of those cases where, like, your subjective information is a lot more helpful than the data, because we look at the data, like 3.7, it's below 5%. We're like, oh, that's great. I kind of suspect your heart rate monitor was not working effectively at the beginning, because your heart rate started really high as you were running downhill, which is a classic Garmin thing, that it does that. So if we kind of look, yeah, it's about the same. But this is one of those things where, like, we go and look at the data, but the more effective piece of information is the athlete's subjective response. Because what's funny is, if you look at these two runs next to each other without your subjective information, they're not that different. In terms of performance, like, they're pretty darn similar. Like the one of the things that measure, so efficiency factor is another one of our metrics that we kind of look at from time to time. It basically is your pace over your heart rate. And if we were to completely believe the numbers, we got 1.01 here, and we go back to your Tuesday run, and we're at 1.00. So technically, the run later in the week where you felt crappy was more efficient, but like that, it's 1/100th. So again, it's one of those things that I would default more to what the athlete was seeing and feeling.
Without that note saying that you were tired, like, anytime I see a note like that, it makes me think that, an athlete might need a day off, or might need, like, a workaround on their training plan. It's always something to pay attention to. And without that note, I wouldn't have noticed that anything was going on in your training plan, because you executed really well. So that's super, super important, that qualitative information.
We are going to wrap up here in a second, because we are we're starting to go long. These Training Peaks talks sometimes do that. Jenny, are there any last questions that you have before we call it for the?
I mean, like, if anybody wants, I guess I'd love to know in the chat if others have any tips, or if they use Training Peaks dramatically different. I don't know. But for you two, I don't have any questions at this time, I don't think.
Yeah, so if you are out there in chat, throw some questions up there, and Molly and I will stay in there for a few minutes, and we can answer anything that you put up there. But I think we are going to wrap it up there.
Can you stop sharing, Doug?
I can stop sharing.
Thank you. Look, we're back to our 3-person display.
Nice.
Awesome.
And
Jenny, thank you so much for coming.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, so the metrics challenge. I see the moots are in.
Nice.
Everybody, let's do it. And let's get those qualitative comments in, and flood Molly and Bag's email with comment notifications.
Yes.
We want all of your qualitative info.
It really helps. I think that, Molly and I would really, like, that's one of the reasons we did this, is being like, the reason we asked you to come on is because it's really helpful to attach a real living person to this information. It is one way that coaches and athletes end up, like, decoupling, is like and I think, Molly, you've experienced this with Roman recently. And because we had heard from Sam Long, who was talking about, like, he sort of kept his experience kind of running in his head, and then, like, didn't tell his coach. And like your subjective comments and your metrics and things like that, they really help us round out your experience.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that Molly and I hear is athletes are like, well, we don't want to bother you. And we're like, oh my God, you're not bothering us. You're making our job easier.
So much
Like,
easier.
like please. And also like you're making it safer.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're helping us prescribe you better medicine.
And your experience is really hiding in the data. There's a lot of stuff that like your bodies after a long time of training are really capable of execution, even when they need a rest. So it's super, super critical that we get that information from you guys. So great job, Jenny. Awesome. Thank you for coming on and being our user interface.
Metric challenge.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, we will see you guys again tomorrow morning at 6:30 a.m. for Yoga with Amy VT. And then join us. Make sure you come on our Zwift ride. You don't have to have Zwift, but if you do have Zwift, you can join us in the Zwift meetup. Make sure you follow me and Chris so that we will invite you. If you don't have Zwift, you can always just get on your regular trainer and follow us on Twitch, which is pretty fun. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Any other announcements? Anything I'm missing?
I think that is it.
All right. Well, thank you, Jenny. It was great to get to spend this happy hour with you.
Yes. Thank you.
And your
for
amazing
coming to
lighting.
attention. You are now dismissed.
Bye, guys.